The release of Amnesty International's report into Israeli apartheid is a good time to remind ourselves of how deeply Britain is implicated in the crimes of that regime. Most directly, that's because we supply Israel with some of the weapons used to enforce apartheid. Between 2016 and 2020, Britain sold £387 million worth of weapons to the regime, making Israel our 8th largest weapons market. British-made arms have been used against the Palestinians, including in airstrikes in Gaza. Britain has also been instrumental in shielding Israel from accountability for their crimes. Boris Johnson has opposed an international criminal court investigation into Israel's 2014 bombardment of Gaza. In a 2021 letter to the Conservative Friends of Israel, he wrote, "We do not accept that the ICC has jurisdiction in this instance, given that Israel is not a party to the Statute of Rome and Palestine is not a sovereign state." Translation: because Israel won't agree to follow international law, they shouldn't be punished when they break it, and because Palestinians have been denied a state, they should have no means to stand up for themselves. So, our Tory government sells weapons to Israel and blocks investigations into how they are used. They also increasingly want to deny anyone the chance to protest that reality. In the 2019 Queen's speech, Boris Johnson's government announced their intention to ban public bodies from boycotting Israel. And according to Robert Jenrick, they want to make the BDS ban, quote, absolute. Just last week, Education Secretary Nadeem Zahawi said those using the chant "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" could face legal action. Ironically, this comes precisely at the moment that Amnesty, Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem have all judged there to be only one regime from the river to the sea. It's apartheid Israel. Calling for Palestinians across that territory to be free seems pretty goddamn sensible. So, we might ask, why are Britain's politicians so keen to defend a country labelled an apartheid state by the world's leading human rights organisations? Well, no doubt it's in large part because we see the Israelis as furthering British interests in the Middle East. But the reasons could also be more personal. According to Declassified UK, a third of Boris Johnson's cabinet, including Johnson himself, have been funded by Israel or pro-Israel lobby groups. And the connections don't stop there. In November 2017, Priti Patel, who was International Development Secretary, was forced to quit her cabinet post after it came to light that she had secret meetings with Israeli politicians, including Benjamin Netanyahu. She, of course, bounced back to become the current Home Secretary. Boris Johnson in 2004 also took a trip to Israel that was funded by the Israeli government and the Westminster lobby group Conservative Friends of Israel. It took him 4 years to declare the trip in the Register of Members' Interests. Finally, we can look at Michael Gove. In 2017, Gove received more than £3,000 from AIPAC, the largest Israeli lobby group in the US. And here he is, speaking at the Conservative Friends of Israel business lunch in 2017.
A beacon of democracy in the Middle East, a land of laws and liberty in a region scarred by extremist ideology and military oppression, an incubator of life-saving technologies and liberating innovation in a neighbourhood where others hold lives cheap and want to keep people in a state of medieval servitude, and a home for the Jewish people who at last have a land they can call their own after millennia of prejudice and oppression, long centuries, when their very existence was under threat. Israel truly is a light to the world.
A light to the world which just so happens to practice apartheid. Of course, support for Israel is not just a Tory thing. Since the toppling of Jeremy Corbyn, it enjoys bipartisan consensus. On previous shows, we've discussed how Keir Starmer believes Israel made the desert bloom. And now, following Amnesty's report into apartheid, NEC member Luke Akehurst has claimed Amnesty's apartheid slur is an attack on Jewish self-determination. Now, I still do find the consensus, the near consensus at the top of British politics here, incredible. And especially as we are seeing all of these human rights organizations coming out, they haven't said this for a long time. Obviously, people on the ground in Palestine have been saying we live in an apartheid regime for a very long time. It's only recently that these incredibly mainstream human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, which has about 10 million members, by far the biggest human rights organization in the world, are saying, in black and white, this is an apartheid regime. it's at that point that you might think that you would see the parties competing over who is more supportive or who is more implicated in that apartheid. So I would hope to see, in a civilized country, that you've got the Labour Party saying, look, guys, why did you sell these weapons to Israel? Why are you accepting donations from Israel? Why did you have secret meetings with Israeli politicians? Those are the kind of questions which would be thrown around if we were talking about an enemy of Britain like Iran or potentially even China. But because this is a British ally, no. And in fact, this isn't just something which is going unnoted by our political leaders. It's not just that this is being brushed under the carpet. No, our political leaders actively celebrate their relationship to the Israeli government, which is practicing apartheid. And they don't just celebrate that relationship, they try and suppress the right of anyone else to have a different opinion. You see Keir Starmer now as leader of the Labour Party because of what happened under Jeremy Corbyn. He has to say, the Palestinian movement, it's full of anti-Semites. It's inherently suspicious if anyone thinks that Zionism might be an ideology which has some problems inherent to it. He's absolutely dismissive of anyone fighting for the Palestinian cause. You've got Luke Akehurst, not just someone who sat on the NEC, by the way. He was the person who got the most individual votes in that election. He actively works for an Israeli lobby group, We Believe in Israel. And as you've seen there, he is not just saying, it's a bit awkward that Amnesty International have called Israel apartheid. I better keep quiet on this for a couple of weeks. No, he's come out next day and said, this is a slur from Amnesty International. This is a slur. And that's what we hear over and over again. No one seriously wants to engage in the facts of the matter and say, no, Palestinians, they do have equal rights, because no, they don't. They clearly don't have equal rights. They're occupied in parts of historic Palestine. In Israel, even if they have citizenship, they're treated as second-class citizens. In Gaza, they're bombed every 5 years, right? So these are not a people with equal rights. And that's not an argument that anyone whose job it is or anyone who has an interest in defending Israel will make. So instead, they say, apartheid, that's a slur. If you call Israel apartheid, that's anti-Semitic. They can't deal with the information which is documented in this report by Amnesty International and was documented last year in a report by B'Tselem and a report by Human Rights Watch, because the facts on the ground are obvious. All they can do is try and dismiss the people talking about these truths as racist or as politically motivated, as obsessed with Israel and Palestine, because the facts are clear. And despite, I think, the work of people like Luke Akehurst, the words of people like Keir Starmer, the legislative ambitions of the Conservative government, the public is realizing that our politicians are so out of step when it comes to Israel-Palestine with the general public, that there should be an opportunity here for campaigners. And I mean, it's a shame, because it could have been an opportunity that was taken by Jeremy Corbyn, but obviously Labour backbenchers and the media combined to mean that was not in any way a possibility.